Hi everyone, welcome back to Growing Up in Scientology. So yesterday I responded to the question, why do Scientologists pay freeloader bills? And today I want to answer the question, how do Scientologists afford to pay these freeloader bills? Because most times when we're talking about these freeloader bills, these freeloader deaths, we're talking about people who just left the Sea Org or recently left the Sea Org. The people with the biggest freeloader debts tend to be people who have been in the Sea Org for a long time, maybe did 2 or 3 years of full-time training and auditing to get ready for a particular post, and then left the Sea Org. Because the way you rack up the most debt as a Sea Org member is to go into full-time training. And staff members can have very large debts as well for the same reason, usually if they spent a lot of time doing full-time training. And you hear these stories of people paying $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, $150,000 on these freeloader bills. So how do people who have spent years working for the church making, if they're lucky, $50 a week, how does someone like that turn around and pay off a bill equivalent to many years worth of salary for your average person? Everyone's scenario is going to be a little bit different, but generally speaking, there's only a few ways this usually happens, especially when someone pays off their debt quickly. Oftentimes, someone who's leaving the Sea Org belongs to a family that has money. In cases like this, the family can just pay off the debt and write it off as a cost of being a family in Scientology, especially if it's a family that's maybe in the 1%, even if it's a $50,000, $60,000 debt. At the end of the day, it's a tax write-off. The family was going to be giving that money to Scientology in one way, shape, or form. So perhaps paying off that freeloader debt satisfies the quota they had given themselves for donations to the church that year or something. One way or another, it ends up not being a very big deal. Kara Sherman is someone who I was in the Sea Org with who comes to mind. Another way involves loans. Scientology registrars are very good at arranging loans, either private loans or bank loans. Sometimes you will have a public Scientologist who maybe was a well-off business owner, and they were convinced to sell everything and join the Sea Org, and they were in the Sea Org for a while, and then left the Sea Org, and somehow they were able to step right back into the business that they had sold, and maybe now they're not an owner, but they're a high-paid executive at the business. Or they just have so much know-how and aptitude in the field in which they had a business in the first place that it doesn't take them very long to establish a new business and get up and running and bring some money in the door. In the beginning, they're actually taking the vast majority of their income and paying off debt. A lot of Scientologists I know in Scientology families I would describe as the working poor or the entrepreneurial poor. You can see that they have a business, you can see that they seem to do well, and yet they have no money. They can't afford to do anything because they're giving it all to Scientology. One other small way this works out that comes to mind is I think Scientology has a pretty healthy mix of competent salespeople. You don't have to be the main registrar or the main salesperson in an organization to have a post that requires some sort of sales abilities. This does not apply to me. I never wanted to have anything to do with sales. I absolutely hate sales. But there are a lot of posts in Scientology that require sales skills. And in this world, sales jobs are some of the best paying jobs out there. So it's not uncommon for someone to leave the Sea Org and walk into some kind of a sales job, a commission-based job, and just make pretty good money right off the bat. Oftentimes, if you have someone who's motivated to pay off this freeloader debt, they're sending the majority of their income to the Church of Scientology until that debt is paid. Another common scenario is particularly in the Los Angeles and Tampa Bay areas. There are some very large Scientologist-owned businesses. Survival Insurance is one that comes to mind in Los Angeles. So many Sea Org members in Los Angeles leave the Sea Org and go to work for Survival Insurance. I vaguely remember that one of these Scientologist-owned businesses actually went out of business recently, and that very well may have been Survival Insurance. I would have to look it up. But if it wasn't Survival Insurance, they're still there. And there are other businesses like them that are willing to hire experienced Sea Org members at a decent salary and also willing to put pressure on them to send a good portion of their salary right over to the Church of Scientology until that debt is paid. In fact, one of the ways the Church of Scientology benefits by having these Scientologist-owned companies that former Sea Org members can go to is the owners of those companies are actually secretly working in coordination with the Church of Scientology and with the Office of Special Affairs to keep tabs on these former Sea Org members and make sure that they are staying out of trouble. Make sure they are not connecting up with big bad suppressive people like myself. Make sure they aren't reading the big bad internet about Scientology. Make sure they are in Scientology lingo, keeping their ethics in and keeping their noses clean. And in fact, in some cases, the Church of Scientology even pays these business owners to hire former Sea Org members who the church wants to keep tabs on. So that's one way that these freeloader debts end up being paid. These former Sea Org members aren't allowed to go work for these businesses and just sit on their hands and do nothing to fix their status in the church. As long as they're working for these businesses that are owned by usually OT8s, very wealthy OT8s who themselves are big donors to the church, as long as they're working for these businesses, they need to be towing the line, contributing to the group, improving their conditions, which really just means getting back into the good graces of the church and generally doing what is expected of them. And then you have just random crazy examples, of which my scenario was one of those, where before I joined the Sea Org, I had bought a house. I joined the Sea Org when I was 22, and I bought my first house just after I turned 20. So this was in 2000, 2001, so before the big housing collapse. We were riding the wave of the subprime mortgage boom. At the time, I was a Class 5 org staff member at the Philadelphia org. I had a regular job Monday through Friday, and I worked at the org Monday through Friday evenings and Saturday and Sunday. So I had a full-time job working for Blue Cross Blue Shield, AmeriHealth to be specific, probably making $30,000, $35,000 a year, and was able to get approved for 100% financing FHA loan to buy this 1,800 square foot, 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house in the middle of the ghetto in Olney, North Philadelphia, 6 miles north on Broad Street from the Philadelphia org. And I'm giving all these details just so someone understands just how these things happen sometimes. It's a 5-bedroom house, so even before I closed on the house, I just ran around the org and rounded up 4 of my friends who, it was 5 bedrooms plus a finished basement. So I rounded up 5 of my friends who wanted to rent a room in the house with me, and everyone paid their first month's rent up front. And I wasn't even cash out of pocket on my down payment for the home. It was FHA 100% financing, so my down payment was very, very small, but I wasn't even out of pocket on the down payment. So the house paid for itself because all the rooms were being rented out to staff members. So when I joined the Sea Org, I could justify not selling the house because the house was allowing staff members to live there relatively cheaply, within a reasonable distance from the org. And to sell the house would have made 5 or 6 other staff members have to relocate. So I said, no, I'm not selling the house. So I was in the Sea Org for about 4 years, from 2002 to 2006. And by the time I left the Sea Org, I still had this house. I had been cash flowing the entire time and had appreciated in value. So I was able to take out a home equity line of credit on the house and, to my great regret, tap that line of credit for just over $40,000 to settle the freeloader debts of me and my wife. Negotiated down big time. I still have the exact itemization of my freeloader debt and what courses we were charged for and how much. And I think that would be pretty interesting. And I will go over that later in another video. I cannot say I have ever heard of or known someone else who owned a home while they were in the Sea Org, but that's just something I kind of managed to get away with there. And if that had not been the case, I have absolutely no idea how or if I ever would have paid off my freeloader debt. Who knows? Another way these debts can be settled is a registrar. Oftentimes, the most successful Scientology registrars, who are usually Sea Org members, they have close relationships with the very wealthy public. And they can actually go to the public and arrange these loans. They can say, this guy wants to pay off his freeloader debt. He needs a loan. Technically, the org is not supposed to be involved in these things, but they get involved anyway. And to the wealthy guy, it's kind of a win-win because he's most likely going to give that money directly to the church, not to Joe Schmo so Joe Schmo can give it to the church, but directly to the church. So in the books, that's a tax write-off. And then it doesn't take much imagination to imagine that as that loan gets repaid, perhaps that money manages not to find its way onto the books and not to be reported as taxable income. So the church washes its hands of any involvement or implication in any creative accounting that occurs on that end. The wealthy individual has something to be gained from participating in such arrangements. And then in all of these scenarios, just remember that the Sea Org organizations that are trying to collect this money are just as incentivized to get creative and make deals and offer buy now special promotions. The director of income at every Sea Org Thursday before 2 is on the phone with their list of freeloaders, calling them up and saying, what can you flow towards your debt? If you give $100, we'll credit you for $150. If you give $1,000, we'll credit you for $1,500. Because realize, this is just free money at this point. This is money being collected from people for things they've already done in the past. No one has to deliver any courses or auditing in exchange for this money. It's free money. It's like $1 in the hand is worth $2 on the account statement. It doesn't do anybody any good to have all this money just sitting there on paper owed to the church by these former Sea Org members. So there's a lot of wheeling and dealing that goes on. And if anybody ever ended up just paying their entire freeloader debt, they were probably just being a sucker, because that almost never happens and really should never happen. So we've covered a few different scenarios. Either somebody comes from a family with money and the family just takes care of it, or someone already has a lot of competence and know-how in a particular industry and they just jump in and restart a business that maybe they had previously closed down. Or loans are arranged either through wealthy private Scientologists or through banks and credit cards. Definitely don't discount how much people rely on credit cards to pay these debts off. And Scientology registrars really are experts in getting people approved for multiple credit cards with high credit limits. They do it all the time. Then you'll have the people who go and get a job at one of these established Scientologist-owned companies, and through sales commissions or just somewhat decent salaries, end up paying off their debt at greatly reduced rates with significant discounts to the debt itself. Or you've got those random crazy scenarios like mine that I described. God help you if the Church of Scientology finds out you've received an inheritance while you owe them money. You will have registrars banging your door down. Registrars are extremely persistent, extremely competent for the most part in the skill of separating you and your money. I know many Sea Org members who received large inheritances, and instead of tucking it away in some interest-bearing account that no one ever touches, gave every damn penny to the Church of Scientology, while at the same time dedicating their entire life to working for almost free for the Church of Scientology. It's such a shame. It is so sad. That's a separate issue from this freeloader issue, but geez, it's just terrible. So I hope I've covered the question of how people afford to pay their freeloader bills. If you're watching this and I've omitted a scenario, put it in the comments down below and I'll try to include it in a future update. All right, that's all for now. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.